Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner, brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Hello, and welcome to Comic Book Yeti's Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm one of your hosts, Jimmy Gasparo, and I am absolutely honored to have the guest that I have on the podcast today. He has written so many different comics, both in the UK and in the US. He's written for 2000 AD, Vertigo Comics, Marvel, DC. More recently, Vault Comics, Human Remains with Sally Cantorino was one of my favorites. But we're here to talk today because he has a brand new series out with Mad Cave with artwork by Val Rodrigues and also Christian Peter and Dave Sharp. We're talking about The Pale Knight. Please welcome to the podcast, Peter Milligan. Peter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm feeling very pale and I'm feeling very nice.
Well, good. Yeah, because you're a little bit ahead of me, so it's approaching dusk, right?
Yeah, it's a while to go yet.
So, they sent me over. Mad Cave sent me over an advanced reader copy of The Pale Knight, which is coming out towards the end of May, issue number 1. And I absolutely loved it. I'm a fan of Val Rodrigues. I'm a fan of yours. I'm also a fan of Val Rodrigues's artwork. He worked on Mezzo, A Wave Blue World, and Deep Roots, another title that I really liked. And I thought, like, Val's artwork on this is like incredible to kind of ground it in that time period. That must be really difficult to kind of present, some semblance of historical accuracy because it's set in 1349. What did you have to do for the writing aspect to get kind of the setting right for a story like this? Like, were you feeding Val reference? Did you tell him things that kind of sparked your curiosity in the writing of it in terms of the setting during, the Black Plague and I guess also the 100 Years' War, if I'm remembering my chronology?
Yeah, well, clearly, in terms of reference material, there's not an awful lot from 1340.
Sure.
Photographic evidence is scarce,
Of course.
But yeah, I mean, obviously, in terms of the research for me, in terms of the story, in terms of, I think when you said semblance of accuracy or certainty, or I think that's the key point. I think that the most important thing is the story, are the characters, and I think that you don't get. It has to come across. It has to be believable as existing in this time. It's a story that's believable in this time, and it has to look like it's in this time, without being slavish to every single historical detail, some of which is pretty much guesswork anyway. So,
Right.
I mean, in terms of what the peasants were wearing, what the regular people were wearing, there are some references which are mostly old paintings and old, like, murals and bits of old paintings. And I did send Val some of those, just to give a general idea of, this is the kind of thing so and so would be wearing. This is the kind of thing this guy would be wearing. So yeah, there is material, there is visual referencing, but there's not much of it.
Right.
The rest
Yeah.
is imagination.
Yeah, I have to imagine that outside of, you know, um, medieval paintings, or paintings from in and around that era would really be the only thing. I just didn't know if there were also, you know, films or things that you thought would have captured that time period. But then again, when I was reading The Pale Knight and thinking about it, I'm kind of hard pressed to think of, even too many television shows or movies that kind of capture this time period. I mean, certainly there are a few, but
Well, one of the problems with to get an accurate description of the Black Death is that not many people survived it.
yeah,
It's there weren't that many witnesses.
yeah,
Look, I think that, but of course, the problem about using another film as a reference source, is that they have themselves had a degree of guesswork. They have themselves had to join up some big, wide, spaced dots and come up with their own vision. And I think
yeah,
that the more you can have your own vision, pointing out some aspects of certain seminal movies, and I'll come to that in a minute. I think that the better it is to have your vision of something. Otherwise, you're almost like becoming further removed from the historical moment, because you're now seeing it via someone else's vision. And so, yeah, so I think we tried to make it our own look. The film, I think I've said it in other interviews, it's no disguise that in many ways this story was for me an homage to one of my favorite movies, which is The Seventh Seal by Ingmar Bergman, which, if you haven't seen it, it's just a work of cinema genius, and always loved that film. And he captures that world really well. He captures the night really well. How historically accurate it is, you kind of don't care. It's enough.
Yeah.
It's enough for you to believe that world, and then you into
Yeah.
the story.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since I've watched the Seventh Seal, and I did read that you had, said that was, one of your favorite films, and this comic was kind of an homage to it. And for any listeners who aren't familiar with the Seventh Seal, if you're even a little bit of a film fan, I would suggest you go watch it. Um, I think I was actually exposed to the parody of it in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, which I think it's David Keith that plays Death in that
Yeah,
film.
well, that obviously, Bill and Ted, obviously, they had a level of historical accuracy that we weren't even aspiring to.
Right, right. But it's just, I think I was exposed to that personification of death first in that early 90s film before I then saw Bergman's The
The
Seventh
thing which
Seal.
you saw the spoof before you saw what the spoof
Right.
was based on.
Exactly.
That's very modern, isn't it?
It is, I
The
think.
spoof becomes the real. So then you look at the real one, it doesn't look believable.
Right. Well, I mean, but you can appreciate it's a beautiful film, and it's really about, well, not, I don't know what I mean to say it's really about. What I took from it, the knight is somewhat disillusioned in the Seventh Seal with his life. I think he's coming back from the Crusades. Although I think the Crusades actually would have been a little earlier than when the film is
so
set.
exactly right. I think that we do have the impression he was coming back from the Crusades, and I think that historically that was slightly off. But
Yeah.
who cares? He's coming
Right.
back. He's coming back from a crusade, and every war in a sense is a crusade, which has a religious element, and he has come back and he's lost his faith. And I think then in the Pale Knight, our knight has come back from the slightly more historically accurate 100 Years' War, and he too has lost his faith. But that's not that isn't the key aspect of this story for us. Whereas I think for the Seventh Seal, it was the key. It was key, and I think that, and it is the key question of that time. It were people, I think in these Middle Ages, I think it's hard for us in our modern, partly secularized world to imagine just how much God played a part in their lives. And I think he was ever present. He was, I think, as was a degree of magic, but I think he was ever present. And to lose your faith in God back then, it's not like losing your faith in God now, which is almost like a fashion choice, I think, but back then it was key, particularly at this time when God seemed to be punishing us. I mean, it's a cliche, and everyone knows this, that the people were told, "This is your fault.
Right.
This is your fault." Well, actually, it got a bit more specific than that. It tended to be, it was your fault, but particularly if you're a woman, and particularly if you're a Jew, big surprise there. Big surprise candidates for the first people that were. I mean, the women were apparently the women were and the working class people. It was their fault as well.
Right.
Because there was a degree of there'd been a degree of social movement light, because there was very little social movement. But I think some women were dressing up in slightly tighter clothes, and I think some peasants were trying to wear slightly different clothes, because if you were a peasant, if you were a certain type of person, you had to wear a certain type of clothing. So if anyone saw you, they knew exactly what level of um of society you were in. And I think they've been just slightly pushed against, just a bit, and many priests really believed that's what God was upset about.
Right. Yeah, and I think in the Pale Knight, that's what you do a very good job of. With there are really a few allusions to it, in particular with the character with Crispin the Squire, where this link between current consequences and morality, which I think is you hear tell of now, but it was so much more like prevalent in society, hundreds of years ago, where it was as if God was like actively partaking to punish, right, not just segments of society, but right down to individuals for the things that they were doing. And of course, most times with power structures, it's used as a cudgel to get people a little, a rung down on the ladder to do what it is you want.
To keep them in place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was as historically accurate as we wanted it to be, and I
Yeah.
think we used them. We used the reference material that we wanted to, but it wasn't always. Old paintings that we used. For example, there was one character. There is one character called Gilbert the Good, becomes very good, or he's okay, well, the pure. He's a very good person, and I wanted him to be based a bit on an English actor. Who's that? I forget now. But Sir John Gielgud. He's a very
Oh, okay.
English. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he's very
Yeah.
like he's a very kind of aristocratic kind of English look to him, and quite
Right.
So I wanted this guy to have a bit of that look to him, and so that was necessarily Val a photograph, and Val did his version of him, and
Right.
that's what you can do to say, here's what I'm thinking. Now it's up to you about.
Nice. Yeah, that's it. It's interesting when you can, pick on certain individuals to kind of inhabit when you have this idea of this character and you think of
It's a starting
another
point.
character
Yeah,
or actor to
it's a starting point, and
right.
I think that it's a starting point in your head because the character seems to, how you imagine uh Gilgud, say, is quite refined, quite, as no coward would say, a little bit effete. Um, um, uh, Summed up a bit how I was seeing that character, and
Yeah.
as soon as that comes across, it doesn't matter if the character looks like John Gilgud. It's more a mood. It's more a starting
Right.
point.
And so, I mean, this to get into a little bit about the story of the Pale Knight, your main character, it's Sir Hugh de Grey,
Mhm.
has come back from fighting in France. It is the period of time in the Black Death, which for listeners who don't know, don't know I don't know how anyone wouldn't in terms of students of history, but it killed essentially half the population of France and about, I don't know, like a quarter to 30% of the population of England.
Yeah,
And
even more. I mean, it was almost inconceivable.
right,
I think it's the closest thing in kind of recent history uh, that had that kind of impact upon society and upon the cultural memories would be the First World War, followed by the Spanish flu, which obviously
right,
wiped out millions, and then you know the cruel Spanish flu, which then wiped out a further few million. I think killed more people than died in the First World War. So those two events, I think afterwards, it really had an effect on society, or society's attitude towards life and death, and society. It wiped out lots of levels of society. So I think that's the closest thing I think in recent historical history that comes close to
right. Yeah, it's hard to imagine now the scale of that when you think like half the population of a country. But Sir Hugh de Grey has returned from France.
He's returned and he's traumatized because it's been a wretched war and he's had to do wretched things and he's traumatized and he comes back from this hell to find an even bigger hell.
Right.
And he goes home, he gets home, and he finds a terrible event waiting for him at home.
Right, and then I mean the end of the issue really. I want to give away too much, not to spoil anything, but I found it very tense. But I was really more so than anything else in the comic. I was really fascinated by the character of Sir Hugh de Grey himself. Like try because there's some great pages in this, like when they show a glimpse of what fighting was like in France. He has a little uh headbutting confrontation with another fellow knight, and there's just some great stuff in this. But I was really kind of fascinated by this guy who has just been fighting. He's on his way home. He's found that the Black Death has reached the shores of England. It's just him and his squire for a good bit of it, kind of, making his way back to see what he's going to find when he gets back home to his wife and son. I really found it such a fascinating character study of this fellow because he's dealing with kind of a loss of faith and all of these things he confronts, how he reacts to them. In particular, the scene where his squire, he's sick from the boat ride, and his squire tells him to go to confession. I thought that whole scene was fascinating. I think that was like my favorite little interplay of the whole first issue. I thought that told so much about the character. I was just kind of curious in terms of um not just the homage to the seventh seal with the character of the knight and giving him some of this backstory, but like what was important to you to kind of flesh out this character for this story? Like, what were you thinking of more of like a modern sensibility and kind of, or were you really trying to capture something from that era?
Well, I think the relationship between the squire and Sir Hugh de Grey the knight is important because in many ways the squire is a more conservative character, and
Sure.
he believes he believes in much more of the current moral and religious mores, and
Yeah.
so he was changed, and I think, and by changing, he has become a more modern mind. He has acquired a more modern mindset in that uh, challenging in his own mind the relationship between God and what's going on here. So I think he's still a man of his time, um, very much so, but he's someone I think we can relate to because some of his thoughts about the Black Death, some of his thoughts about what went on in the war in France, I think resonate with us because they're very human. And I think what I wanted to try to get across was it's a hopelessly distant, it's in the misty past, these um these events took place in, and sometimes these people can feel so alien with their relationship to God, with their relationship to the world. Uh, but at the heart, in many ways, and many of the emotions is still human. It's still humanity, and I think that I wanted to try to make him a character that, amid all this horror, amid all this nightmare, medieval phantasmagorical nightmare, there is someone whose reaction to this stuff is quite relatable.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of I mean, it makes sense. I just found him a very fascinating character, and, I'm not someone who thinks comics can be whatever. I mean, they don't have to be all action or all this, but I really thought the conversations between him and the priest on the ship and him and the squire, I thought were just
Oh, good. Well,
were
in
wonderful.
that case, we were successful. It was great.
Yeah, and then when we get to the end of the issue, I thought was fantastic. And you've already talked about the seventh seal. I think the character of death like looks looks wonderful. I think Val, the rest of the team did a fantastic job, and it's very interesting. Um, you know,
I think,
that com
I mean, I don't think it'd be a big spoiler to say that death is personified, because I think
Yeah.
almost every drawing is let out, so I think people kind of get that and would expect that. And I thought long and hard about how death might be personified, how he should be, and I played around with strange, more unusual ways in which death could be personified. And but then I thought, well, what I was really interested in was seeing this story through the mindset of someone of that time, a contemporaneous mindset, and how would they imagine death? Well, you don't need to guess at how they would imagine death, because almost every drawing from this time has images of death.
Yeah.
Because death was their constant soulmate. And there's only one way death is seen. And I thought, rather than trying to be uber clever or just say, I know it's so difficult to be uber clever.
No, it's this, but I think it works, but you're right. I mean, you're talking about a time period in history, life expectancy was not long, and there are a lot of paintings, drawings where death is a character. Death feels ever present.
Death was with us much more. Like
Yeah.
you didn't go to hospitals to die, and they didn't just without the Black Death. Death was with us much more, and because death was among us. Um, um, but in the Black Death, particularly, he was with us, and there are countless images of how the medieval mind of that time, during and just after the Black Death, envisaged death, and it's as
Right.
scary as hell. And Val has done an amazing job of making death looks. I mean, you just got to look at that thing. You think, okay, that's death, and it's
Right.
scary. It is scary. I want to run with the, So.
It absolutely is. One of the other things I wanted to talk to you about, I was kind of curious, just in terms of, it's kind of tough in a podcast to spring this on you in terms of like big questions, but you've been writing comics for the past few decades, really. Um,
Let's leave
eh,
it at that.
what?
Let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um,
Okay,
no,
forever.
I'm kind of curious though, like in terms of your writing process and writing comics, and I know you've written screenplays and you've written a bunch of different
Yeah.
things, but has your process like changed to adapt to modern, how comics are being done now rather than, when you were writing them in the 90s? And I think there was much more of a concern in terms of not necessarily things being censored, but editorial certainly being more sensitive. Has that affected your process of how you write comics at all?
I think yes and no. I think during the early days of Vertigo, I think what we were aware of and concerned about was just this platform that we suddenly had to really push the boundaries, both in subject matter and in the way in which we told the stories. And I think
Right.
that was perhaps not formal. I wasn't just writing stories like Enigma, uh, because they were pushing boundaries. And I don't know if you know, but Enigma was one of the first gay superheroes, and their story was about someone coming out and that wasn't really to push boundaries, but the way we told that story was pretty unique, and so that we were very aware that here was a platform, an amazing platform, where you could really push some comic book boundaries and see what this medium could do for you.
Yeah.
I think that need has moved on a bit. I think it's more accepted now, and I think that perhaps focusing slightly more on ideas, and I think that being the process of actually when I have an idea, how I formulate it and how I write the comic, that hasn't changed an awful lot.
Okay.
I guess I've changed, as one always changes, so I suppose that could change, but overall, I don't think I don't think the process is changing an awful lot.
Okay. Yeah, I just was curious as to how some of those like exterior things in the medium might have affected, your approach to it, or, in terms of the stories that, you want to tell. I mean, you mentioned Enigma and some of your other like earlier work like The Extremist and things along those lines, your early run on Shade the Changing Man. I was kind of curious if the how the I guess industry functions now, if it ever affected like the stories you want to tell or are
Yeah,
able to
for
tell.
sure, for sure. I think it's not a great insight to say that a lot of people have more than one eye on its potential for being turned into a TV or movie, and that's something which has really changed. And I think
Yeah,
that,
sure.
and the idea that this is something which has maximum value of what it is, and particularly in the early days of Vertigo, I think we were trying to say comics can be great, and I think that, and I still believe that, and I think that there are some people who think comics can be great because they can be made into a film, and I think that whether or not a comic has been turned into a film doesn't make it a greater comic, doesn't make it a better comic. And it I mean, there are some stories that actually work best as a comic. If you take away all the glitz and you take away the Hollywood or the wherever, you could take away the money and the investment test, it's an equally fine and equally valid medium for telling certain stories. I mean,
Yeah.
now, for example, The Pale Knight. I mean, uh we can do whatever we want, and we tell this is exactly the kind of story that could be made into a film or TV, because there are an awful lot of special effects, but there are some special effects, and we don't need to worry about how achievable they are or how affordable they are. We just tell the story that we want to tell, and we can also be nice and quiet, and sometimes just have images. And I think that's something which an image that stays there and doesn't move. And I think that's something which comic has got, which makes it extraordinary.
Oh yeah, I mean I agree. Comics for the sake of, just for being comics, existing in and of themselves. They don't need to be anything else, you know, and that's the great thing. You tell whatever type of story you want. You don't have to worry about the special effects budget, you know, which can be a problem with a movie set.
Yeah, I mean, for example, in Pale Knight, I wanted, as I said, I wanted it to present itself uh, very much from a contemporaneous point of view, or a vision of the world. So there is
Yeah.
some stuff we've talked about death, but there's some stuff that happens, and it really is going into England for Hugh de Grey is a descent into hell. I see this as a medieval horror story, and it's real horror, but also it's the horror of the medieval mind and how it tried to encapsulate and understand what was going on. And some of the myths were kind of like as horrific as you'd imagine they would be, coming, being spawned by this major horror event.
Yeah. One of the things I think Hugh de Grey's wife Matilda talks about certain things that she did, in terms of to try and stop you know the plague from invading. There's some of that in there as
And all that
well.
stuff is researched. I mean,
Yeah.
there are, because they didn't know. They didn't.
Yeah.
This was before germ theory. This was
Sure.
they did not only did they not have the medication, they wouldn't have known what it was for. I mean, and so yeah, there were all types of advised remedies. I
Right.
think leaving southern windows open and not allowing people to get too close. So there was all types of because they had no bloody idea. And I think that some people thought that burning big fires instead of just hot fires could work. Now they thought, and actually, it did sometimes have. I think some of the bishops built big fires and stayed lit with these fires, and
Yeah.
they thought it worked. I think because it would sweat out the badness, but apparently it did have some effect, because if you build big fires in and around houses, the rats run away. The rats run away from the flames. And the rats, obviously, but we now know, were the things which carried the fleas, which carried the
The
plague.
plague, yeah.
So for reasons which they hadn't understood, uh, big fires can sometimes have a good effect.
Mhm.
But holy God, I mean, this is, you can't compare it. But in the early days of COVID, when there was nothing, well, I suppose, the early days of HIV and AIDS, when it was a death sentence. You
Mhm.
get it, and it was a death sentence. And of course, now I have a friend who had HIV, and with medication, he's now clean. It's just extraordinary. It's a treatable serious disease now, and even in COVID, at the early days of COVID, it was there was there had nothing to treat it, and so you just got it, and then hoped you didn't get it too bad. Uh, but obviously, with the wonders of modern science, big big pharma, as I hear people moaning about all the time. You know what? There were times when big pharma's,
Yeah.
I'm with big pharma on this one.
Yeah. I think I am too.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm a big fan of modern medicine, you
Well,
know?
you know what? Kind of, yeah. I mean, in that we'd all be dead, like, turn ages, and yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get across I wanted to just highlight, without overburdening the book with bits of detail, making it like a textbook. I wanted just occasionally to have a bit of a glimpse of, my God, this is how they were trying to treat themselves. And we now know how futile that was,
Yeah.
and how they were just lost. They were just wandering around. Thank
Right.
God.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a bleak period in history for so many reasons, and I feel the comic really.
Yeah, but the comic I don't think is bleak.
No, I
I
I
think
I I don't think it is either.
in the same way as a war story, a story set in the most terrible conditions, could also have hope, could also have joy, could also have all these other aspects of the human experience in it. And I think that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want it to be just page after page of people dying with huge bugles. Now,
Right.
there was enough of that. There was quite a lot of dying, and there were quite. I don't know whether it's going to get their award for the most buboes in one book, but if it doesn't get the award, it should do.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. But yeah, I just thought it was a fantastic first issue.
I'm really happy. When you really love a book yourself, but you kind of think, is this just me, or do I think this is really good? So it's really good when people respond like you, positively to it. So
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think there aren't, you know, I there aren't a ton of comics set in this space, so I think in terms of the setting, it's very interesting. But more so than that, I think the type of story that I see being, played out here, and a very fascinating character with Hugh de Grey, I think is kind of a departure from a lot of characters we see in comic books today. So I think that makes it interesting. Yeah, I found it to be a very fascinating story, and I can't wait to see where it goes
I mean,
from here.
Hugh de Grey is not your average knight you see portrayed in stories involving knights, because they're very
Yeah,
easily interested in the brutal side of being a knight. And knights were this strange dichotomy, or strange balance between, on one hand, they were very courtly, and they were meant to have all this kind of courtly kind of politeness. And on the other side, they were these brutal fighting machines that from the age of 7 have been taught how to kill and maim and slaughter. And
yeah,
so, and I think that Hugh de Grey, if you like, personifies that tension between those two worlds.
yeah. And I can't wait to see where it goes from here. It's a six issue series.
Yeah, I think so. It's great. I mean, I have to say, I think it's
Yeah,
terrific. Uh, I'm just looking at some of the layouts for number 6, and there are some twists coming, and I think that,
cool.
oh yeah, 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 and and there's some pretty horrible stuff, and there's some pretty amazing stuff. That's some
Oh,
that's some amusing stuff.
good, good. I can't wait. Although I I did read an interview I think you had done not too many years ago with the Comics Journal, where I think you were talking about the difference between American and UK audiences, that American audiences want more of a happy ending. I think that was when you were talking about the film that you had written, the Ray Liotta film, Pilgrim. So I don't know if I should be too hopeful for a happy ending, keeping that in mind. But I
Uh,
thought that was a fascinating
let's
distinction. I don't
just
think
say
you're
sorry
wrong,
takes
but
place in Europe.
yeah, I know.
But but uh, but obviously with the plague, um, look, I think what I was talking about then was there was a slight difference. I mean, I think that difference is becoming less and less as particularly because of the language. I think there's a merging of cultures. Um,
Yeah,
I think there is more of a desire for optimism in America. I think they call it American optimism, whereas
right.
that isn't the case in England, I don't think. I think England always looking for, or Britain perhaps, looking more for to underscore, undercut, and understate something, and
Yeah.
to wallow in abject misery. Uh,
What what a way to end the interview.
very good. Wallowing in abject misery. Because
um,
the byline for my career.
oh no, 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 not at all. You think?
No, no, but there's
Peter,
still time.
yeah, I guess there is.
Yeah.
Peter, this has been a wonderful chance to chat with you.
Sure.
I'm a big fan, of your work. I think if listeners, if you're for some reason not a fan of Peter's work, if you can, check out anything that some of his older Vertigo stuff, like he mentioned Enigma or The Extremist, but he's done a ton of stuff for Marvel, for DC. Um, More recently, as I mentioned earlier, Vault's Human Remains with Sally Cantorino, I thought was a
Human
really
remains.
interesting
Human
series.
remains. I loved. And that is a book
Yeah,
that came out of the COVID experience.
yeah,
It's
I thought it was fascinating. Yeah,
well, I just very quickly about human remains. I wanted to think about. I was It comes from the idea that looking around how we can no longer, as people, we can no longer get too close to each other, and I
yeah,
just thought that being close to each other, touching and hugging, is just a human. It's such a human thing. It's just a basic human tenet, and I thought that it's just going to be take. How much can you take away from people? Okay, you can't touch and not get too close together now. Does there come a point where you cease to be human as we understand it to be human, which is why the title "Human Remains" comes about.
right. Yeah, from the first issue, it really felt like it spoke to part of, the moment right now, and very interesting concept in terms of, how you were wanting to tell that story in terms of the backdrop of what was going on in the rest of the world. But yeah, I was fascinated by Human Remains, and I'm a big fan of Sally's work,
I
so
think
I just
she
thought
did an amazing.
the two of you together, it was great.
She did
Yeah,
an
she did.
amazing job on that.
Yeah, yeah, I thought it was wonderful. So yeah, Human Remains, if you haven't read that, listeners, go and check it out. It's absolutely wonderful. But we've been talking about Pale Night from Mad Cave. I think issue 1 is going to be out the last Wednesday in May 28th, I believe is when issue 1 drops. So if you're listening to this, you're going to be able to go to your local comic book shop. I think this is going to come out on Tuesday, the 27th. So if you're listening to this when the episode comes out, you're going to be able to go to your local comic book shop tomorrow, or you can go to the Mad Cave site. I'll have links in the show notes and get the Pale Night. I mean, I thought it was wonderful. I thought it's a great new comic for Mad Cave, especially, I know if you were a fan of um, David Hazan's and Shane Connery Volk's Nottingham, I think this is a kind of not exactly a one-to-one in terms of the time period, but this is a comic that I don't think we see a lot of, like, out on the shelf, and it's a very interesting character study, I think, of Hugh de Grey, set in this interesting time period, and kind of a terrible time period in history. But I think the work that you and Val have done on it, and the rest of the team, Chris, John, and Dave, it's just really wonderful.
And
And
thank you for that.
yeah. So shout out, of course, to my brother Bobby, the Cryptid Creator Corner's #1 most dedicated fan. Bobby listens to all my episodes. Don't worry, Bobby. I'll make sure the comic book shop sets aside a copy of The Pale Knight for you, because I know you're going to want to read it. And Peter, this has been an honor to chat with you. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. It's been fantastic to talk about a book that I really care a lot about.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you being here. So, all right, listeners, rate, review us, do all those things they tell you to do about podcasts. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.